I stood at the back of the crowded reception hall, my invitation clutched tightly in my hand as I scanned the room for an empty chair. The wedding coordinator had greeted me with confusion when I'd arrived, checking my name 3 times against her list before reluctantly allowing me inside. Now I understood why. Every single table was full. There was no place card with my name, no empty seat waiting for me at any table, not even at the far corners of the room. My sister Eliza's wedding was in full swing, and I was clearly not expected to be part of it. I felt a familiar knot form in my throat as I spotted my parents seated near the front, laughing with relatives I hadn't seen in years. Next to them was an empty chair that would have been perfect for me, but a small reserved sign sat on it instead. The worst part was seeing my name crossed out on the seating chart by the entrance with a handwritten note, "Canceled, not attending," in my mother's unmistakable handwriting. My phone buzzed with a message from Eliza. "Surprised to see you actually showed up. Mom said you declined the invitation. There's standing room by the bar." No apology, no explanation, just cold acknowledgement of my presence. I pocketed my phone without responding and retreated to the back wall, trying to become invisible among the waitstaff and photographers. I watched as Eliza danced with our father, her white gown sweeping across the floor while guests clapped in rhythm. My sister looked radiant, happier than I'd seen her in years. Her new husband, James, stood nearby, clapping along with genuine joy in his eyes. He'd never done anything to hurt me. In fact, we'd only met twice before at family gatherings where he'd been unfailingly polite, despite the obvious tension between me and the rest of my family. I considered leaving. Nobody would notice or care. But something kept me rooted to that spot by the wall. Perhaps it was stubbornness, or maybe the faint hope that someone, anyone, would acknowledge that I belonged there too. The DJ announced it was time for dinner, and guests began to find their seats. I remained standing, nursing a glass of water from the bar. That's when I noticed James scanning the room, his eyes eventually landing on me. He frowned slightly, then whispered something to Eliza. She shrugged, dismissively, and their brief exchange ended with her turning away to talk to a bridesmaid. James's frown deepened as he stood up from the head table. What happened next would change everything between my family and me. Growing up, I'd always been the family peacemaker. When our parents argued, I was the one who distracted them with jokes or questions about dinner. When Eliza got into trouble, I often took the blame, believing my shoulders were broader, my skin thicker. I spent my childhood walking on eggshells, trying desperately to maintain a fragile family harmony that seemed perpetually on the verge of shattering. My father owned a small construction company, and from age 14, I spent every summer and most weekends working alongside him. I learned to frame houses, lay brick, and install electrical systems. By 18, I could run a job site, and often did when Dad was tied up with estimates or supplier meetings. Eliza took a different path, focusing on academics and eventually securing a scholarship to an exclusive private university 3 states away. We were close as children despite our 4-year age gap. I taught her to ride a bike, helped with math, homework, and threatened any kid who dared to bully her. But as we grew older, something changed. Or rather, someone changed me. In my sophomore year of college, I came out as gay. It wasn't dramatic, no tearful confession or family intervention. I simply mentioned during Sunday dinner that I had been dating a guy named Thomas for a few months and thought they should know. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother recovered first, clearing her throat and changing the subject to the weather forecast. My father stared at his plate, pushing food around without eating. Eliza, home from college for the weekend, gave me a slight nod but said nothing. That night, I overheard my parents arguing in hushed tones about what they'd done wrong and how this would affect the business. I tried to give them time, space to adjust, but weeks turned into months, and the distance between us grew. Dad stopped inviting me to job sites. Mom's calls became less frequent, more perfunctory. Eliza followed their lead, our once weekly phone chats dwindling to occasional text messages about holidays and family obligations. Still, I persisted. I sent birthday cards, showed up for Christmas and Thanksgiving, called regularly even when those calls went to voicemail. I built my own life, finished my engineering degree, started a successful consulting business specializing in sustainable building practices, found good friends who became my chosen family. I dated Thomas for 3 years before we amicably parted ways, then met Michael, my current partner of 5 years. Through it all, I never stopped trying to bridge the gap with my family. When my father had a minor heart attack 2 years ago, I drove 6 hours to be at the hospital, only to find my mother and Eliza already there, uncomfortable with my presence. I stayed anyway, sleeping in the waiting room chair for 3 nights. When he was discharged, I offered to help with his business while he recovered. He declined. When Eliza announced her engagement to James last year, I sent a generous gift and a heartfelt note of congratulations. The official invitation arrived months later, addressed only to me, not including Michael, a slight I chose to overlook in the interest of family peace. I promptly RSVP'd yes, hoping this joyful occasion might finally begin to heal old wounds. Key. Week before the wedding, I called my mother to confirm details and offer help with any last-minute preparations. She sounded surprised to hear from me, saying she thought I wasn't coming. I corrected her misunderstanding, confirmed I'd be there alone as requested, and asked if there was anything I could bring. Her reply was telling. Just yourself, I suppose. If you're sure you want to come. Despite everything, I still believed in family. I still believed in forgiveness and second chances. I still believed, perhaps naively, that love would eventually win out over prejudice and discomfort. That's the kind of person I'd always been. Patient, forgiving, eternally optimistic about the human capacity for growth and change. Standing alone at my sister's wedding reception, I was beginning to question that optimism for the first time. In the months leading up to Eliza's wedding, I'd noticed subtle shifts in our family dynamics. My mother had begun ending our infrequent calls with "love you" again, something she hadn't done in years. My father had actually answered my call on his birthday rather than letting it go to voicemail. These small changes gave me hope that perhaps time was finally healing our wounds. I started preparing for the wedding with careful consideration. I bought an expensive suit in the wedding colors Eliza had mentioned during one of our brief conversations. I scheduled a haircut the week before, opting for a conservative style I knew my parents would approve of rather than my usual more fashionable cut. I even practiced small talk topics that would be safe for family gatherings: work, minus mentions of my progressive clients, sports, home renovation projects, but nothing about the condo Michael and I had recently purchased together. 2. Weeks before the wedding, I sent Eliza a text asking if she'd like to meet for coffee. "Just to catch up before your big day," I wrote, keeping it light. Her response came hours later. "Pretty swamped with wedding stuff? Maybe after the honeymoon?" It wasn't a flat rejection, but it wasn't an acceptance either. I chose to see it as progress. I arranged for a hotel room near the venue, knowing I wouldn't be welcome to stay at my parents' house where other relatives would be accommodated. I bought a gift that I thought would please both Eliza and James, an antique compass I'd found at an estate sale, knowing they shared a love of hiking and outdoor adventures. I had it restored and mounted in a handcrafted walnut box with their names and wedding date engraved on a small brass plate. It was personal without being presumptuous, expensive without being showy, the perfect balance for navigating these complicated waters. The night before the wedding, I received a group text from my mother to several family members about the rehearsal dinner. I wasn't included in the invitation, but the mistaken inclusion in the text message gave me insight into their plans. It hurt to be excluded, but I used the information strategically, arriving at the ceremony venue early enough to be seated, but not so early that I'd have an awkward wait with family members who might be uncomfortable with my presence. What I didn't tell anyone was that I'd been documenting every interaction, or lack thereof, for years. Not out of malice or with any intent to use the information against my family, but as a way to maintain my own sanity. My therapist had suggested keeping a journal of family communications to help me establish boundaries and recognize patterns. This practice had evolved into a detailed digital archive, Screenshots of text messages, recordings of voicemails, copies of emails and cards sent and received. My phone contained a folder labeled Family, with subfolders for each member. Eliza's contained years of increasingly distant exchanges, including her lukewarm response to my engagement announcement 3 years ago, and her request that I come to her wedding alone because it would just be easier for everyone. There was also a subfolder labeled James that contained our limited but always cordial interactions. Unlike the rest of my family, he always acknowledged Michael in his messages, asking how he was doing or mentioning things they might have in common. Once, he'd even suggested the four of us should get together sometime, an invitation that Eliza had quickly quashed, according to the apologetic text he sent afterward. As I prepared for the wedding, I also quietly reached out to my cousin Taylor, the only family member who had remained consistently in my corner. She confirmed she'd be at the wedding and promised to save me a seat if possible. Though I'm not sure where they'll put me either, she admitted. Aunt Margaret still hasn't forgiven me for bringing my girlfriend to Christmas last year, the Klawiwa. Morning of the wedding, I woke early and went for a run to clear my head. I reviewed my mental checklist of conversation topics and exit strategies if things became uncomfortable. I packed a small flask of good bourbon in my suit pocket, not to get drunk, but to have a moment of private celebration for my sister, regardless of how the day unfolded for me personally. Before leaving my hotel room, I texted Michael a selfie in my new suit. His response was immediate. Handsome as ever. Remember, you're doing this for you, not them. Call me if you need an escape plan. Love you. With his words bolstering my resolve, I tucked my phone away and headed to the church, unaware that I was walking into a situation even more painful than I had anticipated, and that an unexpected ally was about to change everything. James made his way through the crowded reception hall, stopping occasionally to shake hands or accept congratulations, but clearly moving with purpose in my direction. I straightened my posture, preparing myself for whatever was coming. Perhaps he'd been tasked with politely asking me to leave. Noah, he said when he reached me, extending his hand. I've been looking for you. I shook his hand firmly. Congratulations on your marriage. He glanced back at the head table where Eliza was deliberately not looking our way. Thank you. Listen, there seems to have been some confusion with the seating. Arrangements. No confusion, I said quietly. My name was crossed out on the chart. James's expression darkened momentarily. May I see your invitation? I retrieved it from my pocket and handed it to him. He studied it, noting the formal calligraphy with my name and the RSVP card I had returned, clearly marked, will attend. I need to show you something, he said, gesturing for me to follow him. He led me to a small office off the main reception area where wedding gifts were being stored. Once inside, he closed the door and pulled out his phone. 2 weeks ago, I was helping Margaret, your mother, with some last-minute wedding details. She was reorganizing the seating chart, and I noticed she removed your name. When I asked about it, she said you had called to cancel. He showed me a text exchange between himself and my mother from that day. James. Just checking about Noah's placement. I see his name is crossed out. Margaret. He called last night. Can't make it after all, probably for the best. James. That's disappointing. Did he say why? Margaret. Work emergency. You know how it is. I never called to cancel, I said, my voice hollow. I've been looking forward to this for months. I had a feeling something wasn't right, James said, scrolling through more messages, especially after this. He showed me another exchange, this one between himself and Eliza from the same day. James, just heard Noah can't make it. That's too bad. Eliza, Mom convinced him it would be better if he didn't come. Less drama. James, what? That's not right. It's your wedding, but he's your brother. Eliza, it's complicated. Let's just focus on our day being perfect. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My mother told me not to come, and Eliza knew? James nodded grimly. There's more. After I saw these messages, I was concerned. I've always thought it was wrong how your family treats you. So I did something I'm not particularly proud of. I checked Eliza's email. He hesitated, then continued. She left her laptop open while getting her hair done yesterday. I saw an email chain between her and your mother discussing how to handle the Noah situation. They decided to tell you that you could come, knowing you would RSVP yes, but then claim there was a miscommunication about your attendance. They expected you to see there was no seat for you and leave rather than make a scene. Why would they even send me an invitation in the first place? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Appearances, James confirmed. Your mother was worried what the extended family would think if you weren't invited. This way they could tell everyone you were invited but chose not to come. He showed me the email thread, and seeing my mother's words, Noah won't make a scene. He never does. He'll quietly disappear like always. Made my chest tighten painfully. There's one more thing you should see, James said, looking genuinely sorrowful as he pulled up a final message from his phone. It was a group chat between Eliza, my mother, and my father from 3 days ago. Eliza, Dad, are you sure Noah won't make a fuss if he shows up and there's nowhere for him to sit? Dad, he'll leave. He knows where he stands. Mom, I told the coordinator to be firm if he arrives. Say his RSVP was marked as declined. Dad, if he makes trouble, I'll handle it. Eliza, I don't want a scene on my wedding day. Dad, there won't be. You have my word. I handed James back his phone, suddenly feeling very tired. Thank you for showing me this. I should go. That's not why I brought you here, James said firmly. I wanted you to see the truth because I'm about to do something that might cause exactly the scene they were trying to avoid. But I need you to know that I'm on your side here. What are you planning? I asked cautiously. I'm going to fix this, he said. Not because I think you need my help, but because it's the right thing to do. And because I'm part of this family. Now too, which means I get a say in how we treat each other. James, you don't have to— Yes, I do, he interrupted. Not just for you, but for Eliza too. She's not happy about this situation, Noah. She misses you. She's just caught between you and your parents, and she's chosen the path of least resistance. How do you know she misses me? James pulled up a photo on his phone, a framed picture I recognized from Eliza's bedside table. It was of the two of us, taken years ago at her high school graduation. She keeps this by our bed, and sometimes when she thinks I'm asleep, I've heard her looking at old family photos of you two together. For the first time that day, I felt a flicker of hope. So here's what we're going to do, James said, pocketing his phone with determination. You're going to come with me right now and we're going to fix this mess. Together. James straightened his tie and gave me a reassuring nod before leading me back into the reception hall. The main course was being served, and the room buzzed, with conversation and the clinking of silverware against china. We walked directly toward the head table where Eliza sat between my parents, all three of them freezing momentarily when they spotted us approaching together. Ladies and gentlemen, James called out, his voice carrying across the room as he raised a hand. The conversations gradually died down as people turned to look at the groom. I apologize for interrupting your meal, but I need everyone's attention for a moment. My mother's face had gone pale. My father was gripping his napkin so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Eliza looked trapped between confusion and alarm. First, I want to thank you all for being here to celebrate our special day, James continued, smoothly. Family means everything to both Eliza and me, which is why I'm distressed to discover that there's been a terrible mistake with our seating arrangements. He placed his hand on my shoulder. For those who don't know him, this is Noah Richardson, Eliza's only brother and my new brother-in-law. Somehow, in all the chaos of wedding planning, his seat assignment was lost. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I could see some of my extended family members looking confused, others uncomfortable. My cousin Taylor caught my eye from a table near the back and gave me a subtle thumbs up. Noah has always been there for his sister, James continued. He taught her to ride a bike, helped her with homework, and from what I hear, once punched a kid who was bullying her in middle school. A few chuckles came from the guests who knew that story. My mother started to rise from her seat, but my father placed a restraining hand on her arm, his eyes fixed on James with a mixture of anger and wariness. What some of you may not know, James said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, is that Noah has also been trying to be there for his family for the past 8 years, despite being repeatedly pushed away. The room had gone completely silent now. Eliza was staring at her plate. I'm not saying this to cast blame or create drama on our wedding day. I'm saying it because I believe in honesty, and because I believe family problems don't get solved by pretending they don't exist. James turned to face my parents directly. Margaret, Robert, I respect you both. You raised an amazing daughter who I'm blessed to call my wife, but I cannot and will not participate in the exclusion of your son from our family. Noah is part of this family, and he will be part of my family too. My mother's face had flushed from pale to red. This is hardly the time or place, she began, but James cut her off gently but firmly. With all due respect, this is exactly the time and place. Today we're celebrating love and commitment. Today we're celebrating family, all of our family. He turned back to the guests. So I'm asking for your help. We need to make room for one more person at our celebration. Noah should be sitting with his family. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, from a table near the center of the room, an older man stood up. It was my Uncle Phil, my father's brother, who I hadn't spoken to in years. The boy can have my seat, he announced gruffly. I've been looking for an excuse to hit the bar anyway. He picked up his plate and nodded at me. Come on, Noah, there's plenty of room at our table. Before I could move, another voice spoke up. Actually, said my cousin Taylor, rising from her seat, Noah should be at the family table. She looked directly at my parents. With his mother and father and sister, where he belongs. My father finally broke his silence. This is Eliza's day. We're not going to ruin it with politics. This isn't about politics, Dad, I said, speaking for the first time. This is about me being your son. A heavy silence fell over the room. Then, to everyone's surprise, my new brother-in-law walked to the head table, picked up the reserved sign from the empty chair next to my parents and tossed it aside. This seat, he said firmly, was always meant for Noah. It was reserved for him all along. He turned to face the room again. Noah's place card was deliberately removed and his RSVP was falsely marked as declined. I have the evidence right here. He held up his phone. Text messages and emails confirming that this was no oversight, but a calculated exclusion. Gasps and whispers spread through the crowd. My mother looked mortified. My father's face had turned to stone. James, Eliza finally spoke, her voice strained. This isn't how we planned to handle this. No, he agreed. Your plan was to hope Noah would quietly disappear rather than stand up for himself. But that's not the kind of family I want to be part of, Eliza. And deep down, I don't think it's the kind you want either. He walked over to her and took her hand. You told me once that when you were little and afraid of thunderstorms, Noah would sit with you all night, telling you stories until you fell asleep. You told me he was the best brother anyone could ask for. What changed, Eliza? Or rather, why did you let your parents change how you treat the brother you once adored? Tears welled in my sister's eyes. She looked from James to me, then to our parents, clearly torn. I stepped forward, my heart pounding. I didn't come here to cause a scene or ruin your wedding, Eliza. I came because you're my sister and I love you. I've never stopped loving you, or Mom, or Dad. I just wanted to be here for your special day. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice clinking in the water glasses. Finally, Eliza stood up. She looked at our parents, then at James, and finally at me. Noah should sit with us, she said quietly but firmly. He's my brother. He's family. My father started to protest, but Eliza raised her hand. No, Dad. Enough. This is my wedding day, and I get to decide who sits at my table. Noah stays. She walked around the table and, to my complete shock, embraced me tightly. I'm sorry, she whispered against my shoulder. I've been a coward. When she released me, she turned to face our parents. Mom, Dad, I love you both, but this stops today. I want my brother in my life. I want him at family holidays and birthdays. I want him to be Uncle Noah to my future children. And yes, I want to finally meet Michael properly, too. My mother looked like she might faint. My father's expression was unreadable. James came to stand beside Eliza, taking her hand. "This doesn't have to be a battle with winners and losers," he said gently. "This can be a new beginning for all of us. But it starts now with Noah taking his rightful place at this table." Uncle Phil cleared his throat loudly. "Robert," he called to my father, "your boy's waiting for you to do the right thing." All eyes turned to my father. Slowly, he stood up. For a moment, I thought he might walk out. Instead, he adjusted the chair next to him, the one that had been reserved, and looked me directly in the eyes. "Sit down, son," he said gruffly. "Your dinner's getting cold." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even particularly warm, but it was an acknowledgement. And for now, that was enough. As I took my seat between my father and sister at the family table, James caught my eye and gave me a small, triumphant nod before returning to his own chair. The music resumed, conversations gradually picked back up, and dinner continued. But something fundamental had shifted in the room, and in my family, that could never be undone. 6 months after Eliza and James's wedding, we gathered at my parents' house for Thanksgiving. The first holiday I'd been explicitly invited to in years. Michael stood beside me on the porch, a homemade pumpkin pie in his hands and nervous anticipation on his face. "Ready?" I asked him, squeezing his shoulder reassuringly. "As I'll ever be," he replied with a small smile. "At least I have. James is an ally in there." The door opened before we could knock, revealing Eliza with a wide smile. "You made it!" she exclaimed, hugging me tightly before turning to Michael. "And you must be the famous Michael. I've heard so much about you from Noah, and James won't. Shut up about your hiking recommendations." She ushered us inside where the smell of roasting turkey and simmering cranberries filled the air. James emerged from the kitchen in an apron, immediately coming over to greet us with warm handshakes. "Perfect timing," he said. "I need another tall person to help me reach the good wine glasses your mother hides on the top shelf, Noah." My parents. Reception was more subdued but civil. My mother accepted the pie with a polite thank you and a comment about how lovely it looked. My father shook Michael's hand, asking perfunctory questions about his drive and whether he followed football. It wasn't exactly warm, but it was worlds away from the hostile silence of the past. Throughout dinner, I watched my family navigating this new reality. My mother made an obvious effort to include Michael in conversations, asking about his work, as an architect and actually listening to his answers. My father remained mostly quiet but nodded along, occasionally offering a relevant comment about construction techniques or building materials, professional respect, if not personal acceptance. James and Eliza were the bridge builders, deftly steering conversations towards safe topics and smoothing over awkward moments with humor and charm. I caught James giving my father a pointed look when Dad referred to Michael as my friend, which resulted in a gruff correction to partner that felt like a small victory. After dinner, while helping with dishes, Eliza bumped her hip against mine playfully. "Remember when we used to fight over who had to dry versus wash? You always claimed drying was harder because of water spots," I recalled with a smile. "I was a manipulative little monster," she admitted. "You always ended up washing." I didn't mind, I told her honestly. "I just like spending time with you." Her expression grew serious. "I've missed that. Spending time with you. I've missed a lot of things, Noah." "Me too," I said softly. Later, when everyone had moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, James pulled me aside. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Better than I expected," I admitted, though I'm not sure my father has made direct eye contact with Michael all night. James nodded thoughtfully. "Progress is slow, but it's happening. Last week, your dad asked me if Michael might be interested in consulting on a project. Some client wants green building elements he doesn't know much about." I raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Seriously?" "I think he's trying, in his own way," James said. "Your mother, too. She asked Eliza for gift ideas for both of you for Christmas." I leaned against the wall, processing this information. Thank you, I said finally. Not just for telling me this, but for everything. What you did at the wedding, standing up for me. No one's ever done anything like that for me before. James shook his head. Don't thank me for doing what any decent person should do. Besides, he added with a wry smile, it was as much for me as for you. I refuse to spend holidays with people who think it's acceptable to erase family members they're uncomfortable with. That's not the kind of family I want to be part of. Well, the family you chose certainly lucked out with you, I told him sincerely. Speaking of family, James said, glancing back toward the living room where Michael was showing my mother photos on his phone, her expression one of cautious interest. We have some news. Eliza wanted to tell you herself, but she's waiting for the right moment. News? I echoed. James's smile widened. We're expecting, due in June. My heart swelled with unexpected joy. Wow, congratulations. We want you to be the godfather, he continued. Both of you, actually. We thought maybe you and Michael could share the role if you're willing. I blinked rapidly against the sudden moisture in my eyes. I'd be honored. We both would. When we rejoined the others, I found myself observing this tentative new family dynamic with a sense of cautious optimism. Michael caught my eye across the room and smiled, a private question in his expression. I gave him a subtle nod. Yes, this is okay. We're okay. Later that night, in the guest room my mother had hesitantly but voluntarily prepared for us, Michael held me close. Your family's trying, he whispered. It's awkward and imperfect, but they're trying. Thanks to James, I said. Not just James, Michael corrected me. You laid the groundwork by never giving up on them, even when they gave you every reason to. And Eliza chose to stand up for you when it mattered. Everyone's contributing to this healing. I thought about the journey from standing alone at the back of that wedding reception to sitting at the Thanksgiving table surrounded by family, both given and chosen. The road ahead would still have its bumps and detours, but for the first time in years, it felt like we were all traveling in the same direction. The following summer, I stood in a hospital room holding my newborn niece, Elizabeth James Richardson, named for both her parents. My father stood beside me, peering down at the tiny face. She has your eyes, he said quietly. The same shape. Richardson eyes. It was such a small thing, this acknowledgement of shared genetics, of family connection, but it felt monumental. I carefully transferred the baby to his waiting arms, watching him cradle her with practiced ease. Dad, I said hesitantly, Michael and I have been talking about buying a house. Something with a yard, maybe closer to here. He nodded, still gazing at his granddaughter. The Hoffman property over on Maple is going up for sale. Good bones. Need some work. Could be a good investment. Would you maybe want to look at it with us? I asked. Give us your professional opinion? His eyes finally lifted to meet mine. I'd like that, he said simply. As I watched my father holding his granddaughter, with Michael chatting easily with Eliza and James near the window, and even my mother arranging flowers without her usual tension, I realized that James had given me more than just a seat at a wedding table. He had given all of us the chance to remember what family is supposed to be. Not perfect, not without disagreement or difficulty, but present, connected, together. In the hallway later, I pulled James aside. I never properly thanked you. I told him. For what? He asked. For standing up that day and saying, he's family. For reminding everyone what that's supposed to mean. James smiled and clasped my shoulder. I only said what was true. You did the hard part. You showed up again and again until they couldn't pretend you didn't exist anymore. We make a good team, I observed. Brothers usually do, he replied simply. And in that moment, I knew I had finally come home. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking it, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with others who might need this message of family reconciliation and standing up for what's right. Every story deserves to be heard, and your support helps more of them reach those who need them most.